In the ataxia unit at the Massachusetts General Hospital and in the Laboratory for Neuroanatomy and Cerebellar Neurobiology, we specialize and focus on ataxia and disorders of the cerebellum. The cerebellum is Latin for little brain, which sits at the back of the head, but it actually contains between 70 and 80% of all the brain cells that we have. When the cerebellum goes wrong, the problems that we experience are ataxia, which is impairment of gait control, and dysmetria, which is impairment of the timing of the ordering of our movements. We had thought in the field for about 200 years that ataxia and dysmetria from cerebellar disorders manifested only with trouble with motor control, balance, walking, speech, eye motor control. What we now know, and what came out of the work from our laboratory 20 years ago, published in Brain, and supported by work subsequently around the world, is that there is an impairment as well in certain aspects of intellectual processing and emotional regulation. And we call this the cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome. Its manifestations include problems with executive function, and those are primarily difficulty with multitasking and planning, organizing, and strategy formation, some language difficulties, finding words, remembering words, forming sentences in a coherent way, visual spatial processing, difficulties with understanding spatial relations between objects, and also emotional modulation, some changes in mood and feeling and personality. In our study, we set about developing a scale that could be used to identify the presence of the cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome in patients who have cerebellar disorders.
The scale that we developed was one that is not only quick and easy to administer, which is critical for a screening tool, but is also one that is highly sensitive to the types of deficits that we know patients with cerebellar disorders have. So for example, within the domain of memory, where we know that patients with cerebellar disorders don't have difficulty storing information in memory, but instead really have difficulty retrieving the information that is stored, our screen is able to distinguish the different stages of memory to help identify the particular types of difficulties that are going to be sensitive to picking up cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome.
In the beginning, we tested 77 patients and healthy controls on 36 cognitive tests. These cognitive tests provided 71 different measures that all provided scores. These scores were analyzed with regard to whether controls perform better on these tests in patients. Those tests that are significantly different between patients and controls were ranked and grouped by CCAS domain. And those tests that ranked highest per domain were then further analyzed with regard to developing a threshold or a cutoff, meaning what is the patient's score and what is the control score, and where should we draw the line between saying this is a patient and this is a control.
We were then able to define those tests that best differentiated the cerebellar patient population from the control population. Once we had that information, the team was able to pore over that data and then develop a battery of tests, 9 cognitive tests and 1 set of questions based on neuropsychiatric features, to form the scale that became the cerebellar cognitive affective Schmahmann syndrome scale.
This beta version of the 10-item rating scale was then taken to 39 new cerebellar patients and 55 new healthy controls. And these patients were tested just on the 10-item scale. And this allowed us to see that the scale, on the one hand, is able to differentiate patients from controls, but also that the number of tests that patients fail and that number of tests that controls would fail. We came to the conclusion that those participants who fail 3 or more tests on the rating scale have a definite diagnosis of the CCAS.
The screening measure that we developed goes beyond those that are out there right now. We don't just look at total raw score, but rather we really look at each item's analysis and are able to really get some of the richness that you can get in a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation, but doing so in a screening measure that's very quick and easy to score and interpret.
We think the study is important not only for clinicians doctors and neuropsychologists seeing patients, but also for the patients and families themselves, for the following reason. First, we can identify as the caregivers that there is a problem of higher order function in somebody who has cerebellar disorders. And second, for the patient and the family, it validates for them that what they're experiencing isn't just in their head, it's actually in their brain. There's now the opportunity to provide therapy, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, medications to enhance certain aspects of mood or performance, or new interventions that we hope will be coming down the road that will provide patients with better quality of life, not only in the motor control problems of ataxia, but also in the cognitive and emotional aspects of the cerebellar disorders manifesting with the cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome.